Hello, MotoAmerica fans. Welcome to this latest edition of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice, and we are going global for this episode. This is quite special. So we are on with Sam Moses, who is a journalist from, the 70s, 80s. He's done a lot of motorsports stuff, and one of the distinctions about Sam that's so cool is even nowadays, if you get an article about motorcycle road racing in Sports Illustrated, either now on their website or whatever, that's a big deal. And it was a huge deal back then. And everybody seemed to get it. Sports Illustrated, you'd read the articles, see the photos. And here was Sam's articles about Kenny Roberts and Freddie Spencer. He chronicled some of Kenny's Grand Prix years during 79, well, 78, 79, and 80, but then later on in 83 when Freddie was involved. So we are going to talk to Sam about that and lots of other things in advance of next week's Rainey's Ride to the Races, where Kenny Roberts is going to be participating in that, and so is Freddie Spencer, and so is Bubba Schober, who Sam also has done interviews with. So, Sam, with that entire thing, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
We're really excited about this. So, Sam, I want to start off by asking you. I've talked to you a little bit, but I've saved some questions. That how did you come about writing for Sports Illustrated, and how did you come about writing about motorsports and motorcycle racing in Sports Illustrated? Did you have to convince them to do that? And can you tell us how that all got going?
I guess this is one of those stories about lucky fortuitous breaks in the beginning of a person's career. But at the time that I broke into Sports Illustrated, I was the editor of Cycle Guide magazine. And in fact, if you'll allow me to go back, it's just as interesting how I broke into writing about motorcycle racing, becoming a moto journalist. I was still in the U.S. Navy in San Diego, and I was an AFM amateur motorcycle road racer, and one of my road racing buddies was John Weed, who was a guy you also should have on a podcast, because he's still around in Northern California, and he probably knows more than anybody in the world about motorcycle road racing history from the 60s on. Anyhow, John was the editor, along with Bruce Cox. Happy birthday, Bruce. It was only 2 days ago. And the late and sorely missed, dearly missed Gavin Tripp Cox, the original promoters of the Carlsbad motocross and the first Laguna Seca professional road races
and superbikers.
Yeah. So John was my road racing friend, and I got I guess I was discharged from the U.S. Navy, which, oh man, I could go on with stories. 2 days after I was discharged in San Diego, I was at the Isle of Man in 1971, literally 48 hours later. But yeah, I guess that was it. Then I came back from there, was living in San Diego, and I was desert racing by this time, District 36 in the Mojave Desert. And I said, hey, John, I'm going to these desert races. Do you want me to send back race reports from District, I say 36, District 37 for, I think it was gas money, $20 a report? And John said, sure. And I did. And John said, hey, you're kind of good. You want to keep doing this? And that was how I broke into writing about motorcycle racing for fun. And then, okay, so then, yeah, John offered me a job. I had enrolled at San Diego State on the GI Bill, taking journalism, and was continuing to do race reports for John. And he and Bruce and Gavin offered me a job, $600 a month. And so I quit college, my journalism studies, to take a job at $600 a month. And it was like the best move I ever made, because that's when my career began, traveling all over the country to cover motorcycle races and getting paid for it. It doesn't matter if it wasn't very much. I had a wife with a good job. So anyhow, then I got offered a job at Cycle Guide magazine. I became the editor at Cycle Guide magazine. And I had it wasn't really a professional ambition as it was a desire to introduce the world or spread the word about. It wasn't even so much how great motorcycle racing was, but I could see then that what great sports characters motorcycle racers were. That was really what motivated it. So I pitched the story, a freelance story, to Sports Illustrated, the motorsports editor, who I didn't know, but I knew he was the motorsports editor. And in a letter, I pitched a story on Kenny Roberts, because I could see Kenny was an absolute great character. And from the first time, I'll add this story. First time I ever laid eyes on Kenny Roberts was at the Louisville half mile. He was a AMA junior, wasn't even an expert yet, pimply faced 18-year-old. And they had the paddocks, and may still be that way, probably not. But anyhow, they used horse stalls. That's where the motorcycle racers were. They put their bikes in the horse stalls, complete with the horse shit. And there was Kenny Roberts on his hands and knees in a horse stall, and he was razor cutting his tires, all on his own, so that he could ride in the cushion. The loose cushion in the Louisville half mile was infamous, and that was his idea. He would ride around everybody on the outside using his cut modified tires. That's exactly what he did. He ran away with that AMA junior race. And that was my first impression, first sighting of Kenny Roberts ever. So a couple years later then is when I pitched him to Sports Illustrated, knowing what a character he was. And Bob Ottom, the motorsports editor, was open to it. And he said, sure. And he said, but you understand it's entirely on spec. They didn't even offer any expenses. And the end of the story is I wrote the story and they loved it. And they ran it. And that was probably the first story in history that Sports Illustrated ever did on a motorcycle racer, not counting the cover that they once did of Steve McQueen.
I have that one.
Yeah, yes. That's a famous cover.
Sam, was
Steve
that
McQueen without a shirt? Movie star without a shirt. It's
Yep.
not about. Yeah.
Yep.
Sam, was that 78 or 79?
That was 70. I think that was 74. May 6th, 1974.
No. When he went to Europe, I mean.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was talking about the first story on SI.
When I went to Europe.
Yeah.
What? Well, the Isle of Man was 1971.
No, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out when I was there, when you were there, it was either 78 or 79.
Then I would say probably 79, but I'm only 60% sure. It might have been 78. I'm with you, Paul.
The story came out, A Thriller at Silverstone, was on August 20th, 1979, and that was about Kenny, obviously, at the British Grand Prix.
Oh, in the rain with changing tires and all that. Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me of that, because I had that a little bit confused in my head with 1983 when I did Freddie Spencer, a story that almost morphed into Kenny. Kenny got too much space in that story on Freddie Spencer, just because Kenny was so interesting and I didn't think Freddie was.
Right.
Yeah,
but Freddie won the world championship. But that was Jerez. I remember, because Freddie beat Kenny at Jerez, and that was the central part of the story. But 79, and you know what I remember about 79 Silverstone? And you, Paul, were you there?
Yes.
You probably remember this too, and you know better than me because my memory is hazy. But I remember that moments before the start, there was panic on the starting line because Kenny's bike wouldn't start or something, and he's on the grid screaming. Did they still do push start at that time?
Yes.
Yes.
He's on the grid screaming for Kel. And Kel sprints to the grid and gets down his hands and knees and does something magic. And like 1 minute before the green flag drops, they got the engine started and he won the race.
Wow.
That's what I
Yeah.
remember.
Yeah, the bike needed some kind of a clip or something. He was yelling about the clip, and because they only did push starts, the engines weren't running. So it was completely silent because everybody was freaking out. And here's Kenny yelling, I need the GD clip or whatever he was saying. So
We can
yeah,
ask Dad next week.
Yeah.
yeah, that's true. Hey Sam, I want to go back. I want to ask you. So you had three articles in SI. The first one was May 6th, 1974. That was titled "King of the Road on Two Wheels," and let me just read the little blurb. National motorcycle champion Kenny Roberts may be just a mite small, but he makes a mighty roar. So I think that was the first story you did for SI, at least about Kenny.
Oh, sure. That's the one I was talking about. The one
74.
that yeah, they bought it after signing it on spec.
Okay. So that was the one where you first started, and Kenny was still racing in the US, obviously, because he didn't go over to Europe till 78. So your three articles were 74, 79, and 83. And it's interesting about you did one before Kenny won a world championship, one after he won his first one, and then you did the one in 83 when Freddie, the young upstart, came in and well, we know what happened at the Swedish Grand Prix and all that kind of stuff, but that year, but Kenny would have won that if it wasn't for Freddie. So you
Well,
really
you know
chronicled
something,
some, yeah.
Sean, I did one more
Oh,
that didn't run in Sports Illustrated, and this is a sort of interesting story, but it gets back to what you said in your introduction about it being a big deal and how difficult it was. I guess it was Daytona 1978. That was Kenny's fond farewell, if I'm remembering all this correctly, to American motorcycle racing. He had his contract with Yamaha to go off because that was the theme of the story. And he won Daytona in 1978 and lapped the field, as I remember.
Mhm.
And I wrote that story. SI assigned me. I pitched it, of course. Every story that SI assigned me, I pitched like crazy. Me and the motorsports editor for me most of the time was Bob Brown. It was absolutely great. I was so lucky to have a supportive editor for 18 years there. Anyhow, and he fought like hell for everything in the office. I never had to go into the office with the editors and fight for these stories. They might have been my ideas. I pitched them to Bob, but Bob fought for them. Anyhow, Daytona 1978. I covered the race. Kenny laps the field, and now he goes off to take on the world's best riders. The story didn't run.
okay.
Sunday night, what SI did, and it wasn't really a bad strategy. They always assigned at least one more story than they ever knew they had room to run. Monday was their big editing day, just in case one of their events turned out to be a stinker. And when and motorsports already had two strikes against it as a stinker, no matter what happened. So that's what I was dealing with, and the frustration and the fury, because I could tell you other stories about the Long Beach Grand Prix and Nigel Mansell finishing second in the world championship, and my being told, we don't do stories on drivers who are number two. Fucking hey. Anyhow, so Kenny laps the field, says goodbye to America, goes off to take on the world. The story at SI doesn't run because some pole vaulter upped the world record by literally 1/2 an inch. So that's the story that ran instead of Kenny Roberts winning Daytona. And that's kind of how Sports Illustrated looked at it. A new pole world record by 1/2 inch by a Russian or a Polish pole vaulter or somebody, I don't know, was a bigger deal than Kenny winning the Daytona 200 and going off. So that was, yeah.
That story I missed, but yeah. So,
Yeah.
yes. So
Another
then,
motorcycle, for what it's worth, another motorcycle story that didn't run was the International 6 Days trial in Scotland.
Wow.
It wasn't as great a story, but I remember that one. They spent all this money. They sent me to Scotland for 6 days or 10 days and everything, and then didn't run the story.
Mhm.
Uh,
Was that one of the ones that Steve McQueen competed in?
no, this
Okay.
was after his time.
Okay. Um, Tell us about the match races too. Did you write some stories about that, or you covered the match races?
Yeah, that was one of the first things I ever wrote about for Motorcycle Weekly before they ever even hired me full time. And I went with Bruce and Gavin. They were the promoters. And it was just such a memorable, fabulous experience. I think I was still a college student, literally at the time, living in San Diego and studying journalism. And they invited me along to write about it. And I covered all 6 races at 3 tracks over Easter weekend, Easter week, 1972. And that was I think it was the second year of the match races. The first year was more of a show, BSA Triumph show. Um, but that year they brought along Cal Rayborn with the old tired Harley and iron KR. It wasn't even the new alloy motor. And I think he paid for his mechanic, Walt Falk, out of his own pocket because Harley really didn't support it. Dick O'Brien, he later might have come around, but in any event, being there, I feel privileged to this day to be able to say I was there for all 6 of those races, and I saw what I remember most was the British fans went from looking down their noses at Harley Davidsons to saying, "Oh my God, who is this Cal Rayborn? And how can he possibly ride that old piece of iron that fast?" And they what they didn't have, surprisingly, but maybe I say surprisingly, I don't give Brits enough credit when I say this. They didn't seem to feel any resentment that this unknown American on a dirt tracker on a Harley Davidson was beating the absolute best of their British short track races on the best machines they could come up with. They weren't resentful about it. They were so astonished and recognized the genius of Cal Rayborn that they were automatically Rayborn fans. Now they were still cheering for Ray Pickrell in those races, but the races themselves were such fabulous battles because it was just the 2 of them. Those were the only 2 riders ever in contention for first place in all 6 races. And Cal won 3 and Ray Pickrell won 3. And I think they tied on points. And everybody was happy and everybody realized that they had witnessed history. And I don't have most of everything I wrote, I still have, I've saved, but not my Motorcycle Weekly pieces. But I wished I had them. However, that said, I do have, and it's something I could scan you, Paul. You asked for that. I freelanced the story after the fact, after I came back and it was in Motorcycle Weekly. I think that Cook Nelson called me up from Cycle Magazine, or else I pitched it to him. And I said, "Cook, it is a great story." And he said, "Yeah, you're damn right it is." And so I wrote a 1-page story. I think there was maybe just one small photo because it was, by that time it was 2 or 3 months after the event. But I wrote a 1-page story on the match races for Cycle Magazine, which I've saved it because it was a good story and I absolutely enjoyed it. I mean, there's some stories that you sit down and the moment you start writing from the first sentence, it's absolute fun and joy. And you cannot wait to tell this story just for the fun of telling it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that's what I really loved about motorsports writing and why I was so blessed to back into that, because I never really wanted to be a writer. I never thought about it. High school, or I joined the Navy after dropping out of college 2 times, and didn't know what I wanted to be. But in those days we didn't worry about it so much. I'm a child of the 1950s where we didn't have those stresses and anxieties and neuroses that a lot of unfortunate younger people they have them simply because they come down on them. They're living in a much more difficult time. In any event, I backed into being a motorsports journalist because, like I told the story already, I was going to the desert races. I knew John Weed, and I said, "Hey, do you want race reports for gas money?" And that's how I found this career that's carried me for some 40 years. And I grew into other things after motorcycles. It was motorsports and cars for 20 years at SI.
Yes.
And then it became outdoor adventures, including a plug for my latest book, River Without a Cause, whitewater expedition in the Amazon. But those kinds of things they really all came from the motorcycle racing. I wouldn't have discovered that I had the ability to do these things if it hadn't been for motorcycle racing.
Well, I want to ask about a certain neurosis right now. When you were dealing with Kenny Roberts, what was that relationship like with him? Was it contentious with you as a writer? Was he free in his communication to you? Did you have to keep a distance from him? Did you learn any new swear words from him?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a really good question, Sean. The answer to all those things is no, it wasn't any of those things. I was too young and too enthusiastic to for there to be any contentions. And Kenny was too upfront about, and he's the same way today. This is who I am. Take it or leave it.
Yes.
Now, that said, I recognize that Kenny also, and I'm sure he's grown some and from experience, he's also become wary of journalists and knows that some of them are assholes and doesn't want anything to do with them. But at that time, both of us were, I was just totally enthusiastic and felt lucky to be discovering such an amazing character. And he was completely open about who he was. Now, that said, when the story came out, there are a couple things specifically I remember that, he didn't care, but he got heat from the outside about things stories he told me. And I could go on and tell you stories about other motorsport. That was a great thing about racing drivers, motorsports competitors and athletes in particular, and the stock car world and other worlds. Anyhow, but there were two things in that. No, they weren't in the first Kenny story. They must have been in the 1979 story.
Right.
Because that's when I remember interviewing him in his motorhome when when they went to, and I think in that 79 story, I didn't get to see this myself, but with those two motorhomes, and Paul, you probably remember more vividly than me. You must have been a kid or a baby.
I wish.
Traveling in those motorhomes, because I remember when your mom Jan was pregnant, and I remember this is probably, except today I see you as a grizzly guy with a gray stubble. Last time I laid eyes on you, you were a baby in diapers.
Well, no, it wasn't that much. I was actually, it's funny because I went to San Diego State as well and journalism and the whole thing, and ended up at Cycle News, as you know. And my dream job would have been Sports Illustrated back then. And I didn't know if I didn't think I was good enough or what have you. But then when you came over to Europe, I was like, oh my God, look who that is. He's from Sports Illustrated. And it was like a huge deal for me. I think I was 17 or 18 at the time. So I hope I was out of diapers.
Well, I apologize for not remembering you as a teenager.
That's fine.
Who had a certain amount of admiration for me, if not worship, or maybe you thought I wasn't any good and you just wanted the job.
No. I thought everything in sport. I would read Sports Illustrated cover to cover every single week, every single story. So
I wonder if it was Junior that was in diapers. You think, Paul?
Yeah, that's where this story is.
Maybe,
he wasn't really in diapers because it was. I don't know. The two things that were in that story that I heard secondhand, because I would never hear this from Kenny. Kenny he doesn't care enough, I don't think, to to ever complain to a journalist afterwards. But I can't remember how I heard it. I heard it secondhand that his wife at the time, Patty, was upset. And it might have been that Yamaha was upset because I wrote about him carrying a pistol in that motorhome when they traveled around Europe. I don't know how you got away with it in those days, but he did. And at one race that he was particularly upset over, after the race, he got drunk and shot down the Michelin balloon.
Yes, he did.
With his pistol, because he just was, pissed off at having.
Yes, he did. Yep.
Having lost. I don't know who he lost to. It was probably, I don't know, maybe Freddie. 79. But whoever beat him was on Michelin tires. And Kenny was loyal to Goodyear. So that was in the story because he told me about it. I didn't witness it. He told me about it, and it went in the story. And the other thing was, and he told me about this too. He said he kept a belt handy, never exactly said he used the belt to whip his toddler, but maybe he brandished it to scare the kid or something. And that's all I said in the story. I heard that Patty was extremely upset about that and gave Kenny a whole lot of grief that he revealed that. But in terms of it, I will say, as a journalist, being contentious, never been contentious with the subject. I've always because there's nothing to contend. You just let them be who they are. And you hope, well, the contention might come if they try to cover stuff up or if they lie and it. But that was the great thing about motorsports and racers and why they were unique athletes. Back in those days, anyhow, they didn't do that. Now there's so much PR. I'm sure the NASCAR guys are required to go to school first to learn how to speak and what to say and what not to say. But back then they were who they were. Bobby Unser is another one who told me stuff that got him in serious trouble, not with me. A short upshot to Bobby Unser was afterwards, after the story ran, which everybody loved the story. And Bobby Unser's manager told me face to face, he said, "I love this story. You nailed Bobby Unser." But Bobby got a lot of grief because of things that he openly said in there, and he couldn't understand it. It confused him. And this came back to me. It might have been his manager who told me. He said, "Tell me something. Did Sam fuck me or not?" Because he didn't know. He couldn't understand why there was a negative reaction to him being Bobby Unser. And he, they all remained friends with me afterwards. There was never a problem because I would not betray anybody. And as a journalist, my rule was, if they say to me in advance, "I'm going to tell you something, please don't print it," I never, ever would. Never would I betray that. But if they didn't ask me in advance, it was fair game. And I would never say, "Wow, that's pretty spicy. Can I use that?" I would never do that because, I wouldn't be doing the best job I could do. And I had at that time life was different then. There was no social media full of, maybe millions or at least tens of thousands of observers who can turn a small indiscretion against you and make it turn it into a vehicle for hate. So nowadays it's different, and I would protect subjects in a way then that I wouldn't, because I was always on the side of the reader. I just felt that that's what this is all about.
Mm-hmm.
Telling the reader who this person is, warts and all, as they say. Nowadays, it's different. You can't trust the reader or the viewer or the user whatever you want to call them. And I would be on the side of the subject and protecting their privacy while still trying to, you know, reveal their character. But luckily, I don't have to do that anymore. We don't
So
have
I
articles.
you obviously did the story with Kenny and Eddie, or Kenny and Freddie, I'm sorry. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, you couldn't find two different guys than that.
that's that's for sure. Uh, and it was a little bit odd, um, because the story was supposed to be about Freddie.
Oh, it
Um,
was? Oh,
yeah, the Freddie story was supposed to be all Freddie,
okay.
and ostensibly it was. It was a feature
Yes.
article on Freddie. Um, but as a writer, when I got there, I mean, Kenny, it was a battle between the two of them,
Yeah.
obviously. Kenny was just so much more interesting. I mean, as a writer, when you have two subjects, who you're going to write about, the one that's more interesting.
Mhm.
And that's kind of what happened. And I did my best with Freddie, and a Freddie story. And this is meant to show the character of Freddie Spencer as well. Um, I didn't really remember. I don't remember much about that story except being at Jerez and standing on uh, the roof of a motorhome with Freddie's friend, and I think he was a pastor or a priest, a very very nice guy, and he told me more about Freddie on the roof of that motorhome during the race when Freddie and Kenny were battling than Freddie really told me about himself.
Hmm.
Uh, um, Now, Freddie, he never said anything that was untrue or slightly untrue or tried to twist it in his own favor. However, he didn't tell me much about himself.
Mhm.
Okay, and a lot of Freddie at that time, maybe still today, was his faith, his belief in Jesus Christ, um, and I that was to me that was the most intriguing thing about him, um, as well as his history and the price he paid, the hard work, many 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 years of just life on the road as a 14-year-old. But in any event, I wrote about that without his talking to me about it. And when that happens, when a journalist is put in that position, when they really are compelled to or obligated to address something, but the subject won't talk about it, the journalist is put in the position of having to speculate. And it's a fine line between insight and speculation. Um, and I don't think I got anything wrong, and I never heard anything from Freddie about it until I read his book, only a couple 3 years ago, and I was quite surprised to see where I was mentioned for a
Yes.
couple pages in his book about Sam Moses this, Sam Moses that, and I said, "Gee, Freddie, I never knew you had any kind of problem at all with that story." Uh, and I think I sent him a note afterwards and said, "Freddie, I think it was an excellent book. I congratulate you on everything. Um, and I'm sorry you felt that way, but please try to understand that I had nothing to go on. If you had talked to me about it, it would have been different." So, and I think when I read that in his book, I said, "Freddie, you expect me to be a mind reader, and I can't be." So, uh, but even after that, well, no, it was before I read the book, but after the story ran, this would have been 10 years later in the early 90s when I revived my own amateur career as a motorcycle road racer. Um, and I went to the Freddie Spencer School in Las Vegas, and he was there. He absolutely treated me wonderfully.
Yeah.
Uh, he got me a free helmet. Uh, I don't think I even had to pay for the school. Um, and I ended up buying one of his Honda 600 track bikes from Nick Einach. He was Freddie's manager at the time.
Yes.
And it was a great school. And I came away, you know, uh, feeling really confident. I learned a lot. I was really fast at the school. There were some of the cycle news guys there. I think Chris Ulrich was there, some of those guys. And I ran with them on the track. And I'm saying that's pretty good for, you
Yeah.
know, I was a 50-year-old journalist running with the fastest road testers from motorcycle magazines. I felt pretty good about that.
That is good.
Anyhow,
Hey, Sam, I
I'll
want
give
to
Freddie
talk.
credit.
Oh, sorry. Okay, I
Yeah,
want to tell you
sorry.
something about Freddie. That's okay. I just wanted to get this out. So we talked about this a little bit in advance, and I mentioned to you that we were at Ridge Motorsports Park last weekend, a track that you've raced on and know very well. And so Freddie was there. He works with the Royal Enfield Build Train Race program, which is 12 ladies who they build their own bikes. They're Royal Enfield Continental GT 650s. They train on them with with Freddie's help, and they race. So I talked to him about this whole thing, and he said for sure he harbors no animosity towards you, and he even said when you talked to him, he was very, very shy. And he said I had to get out of that shell in the beginning. I didn't really say much of anything. And he also kind of knew he was the new young upstart. And, the story was really more about Kenny, which is why I'm surprised that the focus really was more on Freddie, because he even felt like, he had a role to play in that whole thing. And of course, we know what he went on to do. But it was just interesting to hear him say that what you're saying about he didn't share much, it's because he was shy. That's what he said.
He stayed to
Yeah.
himself a lot back then. I mean,
Hmm.
he'd be in his motor, he'd basically go from his bike to his motorhome and from the motorhome to the bike, and he'd fly home between races. And it was just, he just chose a different way of doing things. And I think that was just based on his personality. And I think the shyness is what led to all that. And
Well, that's funny
he
because
probably felt like it was him against the world too, because he knew Kenny's
Yes.
popularity, and he's
Yes.
this young kid about to take the title from the God King of the sport kind of thing. So I think that it just added up to him, maybe being a little uneasy when he wasn't on the bike.
well, it's funny because I hear it now and I completely believe it, and my insight failed me because that makes him almost unique as a motorcycle racer.
Yeah,
Uh,
it does. It does.
and
Yes.
so, and if what I saw, I perceived as focus and determination. Uh, and I don't think, because I was old enough at the time, older than Freddie, to um, um, have some generosity toward shyness. And I would have, as a journalist, I would have compensated for that if I had recognized it. But I perceived it as, like I said, focus,
Hmm.
uh, keeping to himself. Uh, that That's pretty interesting that you guys tell me that now. What is this?
Yeah.
40 years, 40, God, 40 years later?
And he's
It
he's
doesn't feel like.
he's a lot different now than he was then. Like it's night
Yeah.
and day. He's just
He's the
not
best.
he was always a nice guy, but I mean he's just open, and he's just one of the guys, and it's kind of good to see him, in this stage of his life.
Yeah, and Sam, he might not have even recognized that it was his shyness. He might have not even realized it back then, but he's come to realize now that he's out a lot more gregarious that, back then he didn't feel that way. So maybe he couldn't even articulate that to you or show that way. And no, there's no doubt he was focused. There's, no doubt about that at all. So it could have been part of
Yeah.
that too. But hey, so tell us some stuff about Bubba Schober.
Oh, I'm sorry to say, truly sorry. I can't remember that much.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I know you did a story about him,
it,
didn't you? Yeah.
yeah, I did. And that was why, Sean, I asked you because I went to the SI Vault to look for it, to read my
Oh,
story.
okay. I'm sorry. Okay,
And I
put you on the
have a
spot.
copy of that story, back in my cargo container in Oregon.
Okay.
I have everything I ever wrote for Sports Illustrated, 400 or 500 of them, and probably, 300 or 400 were motorsports. Um, but yeah, I just remember that it was a very, very hard sell to Sports Illustrated, but because he was a dirt track racer, and that's the one and only at that time. It was before he, you know, yeah, before he made the move to try to become a road racer. And I only just yesterday, when I knew we were going to have this podcast and Bubba would come up, I Googled him, and I read some things about him that I didn't know. And that's because when I wrote about him, these things hadn't happened.
Right. Early on. Yeah.
But I remember the idea of the story appealed to me because he was from Texas and he was a dirt track racer, and he was good, and he was a great character with integrity. And I probably, when I suggested the story, I thought it's probably not going to run. That isn't enough for Sports Illustrated. But the story must have been good because it did run. And so
there was no pole vaulter that day.
Yeah. And I don't remember.
That's right.
Those SI stories, because I had expense account and enormous freedom. And I should say that the flip side, the upside of being the motorsports writer at Sportsfred, the downside was, I was always the second cousin, the poor cousin. And because Bob Brown, my editor, was the only, and he came from Car and Driver magazine.
Okay.
He went back to the days with Brock Yates at Car and Driver. So Brown was a car guy, but absolutely no one else on that staff at Sports Illustrated had any interest or knowledge in Sports Illustrated other than what I could stir up with my stories. In motorsports.
Motorsports, right.
They were all stick and ball guys. They had no understanding of a sport that didn't have an end zone,
right,
or a literal scorecard. And so that was the downside. Every motorsport story was a battle, and they always got in based on character, the character of the subject, the feature articles, and the event, because SI felt like they needed to cover, and there was an upside to this. They needed to cover the top events. So I wasn't a motorsports beat writer because I never had to grind out, all of the races. Right. I only showed up for the primo events, the Daytona 200s, the Indy 500s, the NASCAR 500s, Long Beach Grand Prix, United States Formula One races. And I only went to the smaller tracks when the character I was writing about, the subject, was there. And I cherish those times as well, because I was able to see the nitty gritty, not just all of the flashy part and all of the glamour. But what I was going to say is the upside of all of that is I was blessed at Sports Illustrated, because when the editors cared and followed all of those stick and ball sports, they all had their own ideas, and they all had input, and they all wanted to tell the beat writer where to go and what to do and what to write about. Because nobody knew anything about motorsports, nobody ever knew where I was. And with the Sports Illustrated expense account, I had enormous freedom. And Bob Brown did, but he covered for me because, we were in on it together. And it was a great situation that I recognized at the time, but I failed to fully appreciate. You only really appreciate those things in hindsight, I think.
Right.
But it was great. I could tell Brown, hey, Brown, I want to go here. I want to go there. And he'd say, sure, go ahead. and I would disappear and come back and turn in my expense account at the end of the month, and everything was cool. Um, Including a generous budget for entertainment. I could take anybody I wanted out to dinner at any time. And questions were never asked. And I still spent far less doing it than some of the big name writers at Sports Illustrated did. I mean, Dan Jenkins was notorious for picking up the check at Elaine's in New York City 2 or 3 nights a week for $1,000 for 10 people.
Wow.
And I was small time compared to that.
But you know, Sam, I mean, it's still to this day. I mean, when I first contacted you and you were, I'm not gonna say you were reluctant, but you were kind of like, well, what do people want to talk to me about? But I mean, to this day, the fact that you did what you did in Sports Illustrated, if it happened nowadays, it would be a massive thing. And I mean, those are iconic articles that you did in a magazine devoted, like you said, to stick and ball sports. So huge credit to you, huge credit to your editor, Bob Brown, about
Bob Brown, yeah.
about what you guys were able to do, because I mean, it still stands out. People that know about this will go, "Oh man, yeah, I remember that. That's crazy that they were in, it was motorcycle racing in Sports Illustrated." So, you know, all credit to you, absolutely, even all this time later. So,
Okay, well, we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to
yep.
fast forward to Sam's life now, because
Yeah.
I follow him he's a friend on Facebook, and I see photos, and he told us earlier he lives in a 2.5 world country. So I see some of the stuff, Sam, that you're dealing with there, and I'm like, why?
Yeah.
There has to be a really good reason. Can you tell me why?
I'm hesitating because you stumped me.
Wow.
Because you don't know why.
I mean, holy crap. Well, first of all, my wife is Indonesian.
Okay.
Second of all, I have no desire to live in the United States with the times today. I made the decision to leave the United States and become an expat the day Donald Trump was elected in 2016, literally.
So it hasn't been that long then. Okay.
Yeah. On the day he was elected in 2016, and it was, and again, this one reason I can't live in the U.S. right now is because every time you open your mind, you run the risk of offending 50% of the population. And so the biggest answer to the question, maybe not why Indonesia, that's the second part of the answer, and that's easy. But Trump is the symptom, not the cause. And the day after he was elected, I said, I don't want to live in a country where 50% of the population thinks he is a good thing and is the answer. And that was it. And I was in Australia. At that time, I was spending 6 months in the US and 6 months in Australia, going back and forth. And so I said, I'm out. I'll begin to transition myself. And even then, when he was not reelected, I didn't change my mind, because the US feels very, very foreign to me. The standard of living is too high. The expectations of that standard of living, and there's too much of the world to see. There isn't enough time to spend it in the United States. I mean, I want to see so much more. So it didn't change, and it wouldn't have changed if Trump had lost the election, the recent one. If Kamala Harris were president, I would not want to move back to the United States. And so I married an Indonesian woman. And so we kind of ended up in Indonesia because of that. It wasn't really an active choice. We lived for a while in Ecuador because I wanted to see Ecuador and try that out. But the answer, Paul, the shorter answer to your question is the environment. We built a house on the island of Sumatra, but it was too remote. We lived in Bali, but it got too crowded. So now we live here on this island of Lombok, which is not without its problems. However, when I wish we had the camera working on this Zoom podcast, because over my shoulder is the Indian Ocean, and it would be a wonderful background. In fact, I set up my laptop outside on the outside kitchen table so that the Indian Ocean would be in the background.
We can hear the birds. We can hear the
Yeah,
birds, Sam. Yeah, that's cool.
I'll send you a couple if you're going to run pictures when I'm
Yes,
talking. I'll send you a couple pictures, not of motorsports and racing, but of the surrounding as well.
that'd be
But
great.
Paul, the the real upshot is surfing slash bodyboarding. That is my final dream. I did, you know, I lament, regret I didn't do a, as much racing, both motorcycles and cars, as I could have and should have. And I think I could have been better at it, far, far from being good enough to be a pro. But I could have been a lot better at it than I was. And so I think about my regrets and mistakes far too much about that. But I'm done with that, except for the fact that I still have 6 motorcycles right here, including a Kawasaki 250 Supermoto, which is considered a big bike around here.
Yeah,
And it
wow.
really is very fast for these roads because, as I've said before, I mean, when I go back and forth to town, which is an hour away, the first thing I have to get out of my property is a 3 kilometer rocky rocky rutted dirt road. So I blast over that. I also have a Honda CRF 150 bored out to 196cc dirt bike with knobby tires because there's a lot of mud here as well. So I blast around even at 78 years old. My off-road skills are as high as about they almost as high as they ever will be or ever were. But the road to town here on Lombok, from a motorcycle standpoint, I can't imagine a better place because the description I have in my head, which I think is almost literally true, is this feels like the North Shore of Oahu 100 or more years ago
Hmm.
in terms of development. The environment, that's what it feels like. The weather is fabulous. It's windy, it's breezy, it's not too hot. There's a lot of rain. Um, and there's no develop. It's just now beginning to be developed. The resorts are moving in, and they're still not even built yet. So it's the environment. That's why I live here on Lombok. I've looked all over Asia, including Thailand, and I can't find any place like this. And the other thing is, as far as my bucket list, unfulfilled ambition with sports, it's surfing. I've written about surfers. I wrote about Jerry Lopez in Uluwatu, Indonesia in 1980 and the Banzai Pipeline. And I've admired surfers. I always thought they've had it's what Bruce Brown and I always had in common. And we talked about this, is that Bruce Brown was motorcycles and surfing, but not really in that order. It was surfing and motorcycling for him. For me, I never surfed when I lived in Southern California because I was always into motorcycles and never had the time to do both. But I'm too old for motorcycles now. Even though the Mandalika circuit is right next door,
That's right.
I've thought about a track bike, but they don't have track days here, and they do not have mechanics on this island of Lombok who could maintain a decent track bike. And at my age, if I fell off and broke a leg, I'd be done for the rest of my life. I can't
Well,
afford any broken bones. And surfing is it for me. However, I say surfing, but that's stretching it a bit. It's bodyboarding because my knees don't pop me up on a board well enough. And my balance isn't keen enough to be a good surfer. But bodyboarding is exactly the same. You're on the same waves, traveling at the same speed, dealing with the same ocean. You just lie on your belly, which is like sledding when you were a kid.
right,
So
right.
that's the answer to question, Paul. It's number one, the environment on this island, and number two, the access to fabulous waves
That's
uh,
cool.
Well,
to perform at a sport that at my age I'm still capable of doing.
and you even
Yeah.
have warm water.
Oh, fabulous.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem
What's
here is I live right at the beach, but the water's, I mean, the winter, I just want to stay away from it, but
Yeah.
it never gets that warm, you know. You know that is.
I know. I windsurfed and kited in the Columbia River enough to
Ooh.
despise cold weather or cold water.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, Sean, I think we should let him get back to his luxurious life there. I'm jealous a little bit, but I don't know if I could. I don't know if I'm man enough for it, but maybe one day
Luxury
we'll
is
find
the
out.
wrong word, Paul. Hey, I'll leave you with this. When I first, there was an initial infatuation, as there is with newbies, about everything, and I mean, I still keep a journal, and there is a book in there about the transition and moving here. And the first working title was "I Am a Lombakian." And then when I started to understand the island a little bit better and the people, I said no. I changed the working title to "I Am Not a Lombakian." And then it got even worse with the people. And this gets to your comment about luxury. The working title now is "Paradise My Ass," because
That's good.
there are downsides, and it's mostly has to do with the people.
Hey Sam, can I ask you, can we have you on again sometime when we get a camera so people can see you? And maybe I'm going to tell this story real quick, not a story, but hope you're okay with it. I think you're coming back to the U.S. Pacific Northwest, and you're going to get maybe a knee replaced or something this fall. So I don't know if you can find the time we can do something out here, or if we can figure out the camera, but it would be so cool to get you on again because we left a bunch on the table. Sam, I wanted to talk to you about Eddie Lawson. I wanted to hear the Cale Yarborough story. You've got a lot of stuff to tell us. So would you do another episode with us?
Sure, I'd love to.
Okay.
And if my wife can get a visa, that remains in doubt.
Yeah.
Don't get me started.
I
mean,
understand.
according to immigration law, she absolutely 100% qualifies. But what's happening in this immigration world is not according to U.S. immigration statutes anymore. But if she can get a visa to come with me, I am coming back to the Pacific Northwest in September and October, my favorite 2 months of the year. And yeah, for sure, we can do it then.
Okay. That'd be great. Awesome. You were awesome, Sam. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on with us. You're an icon of journalism and motorcycling and all of that. So it's great to talk to you.
Thanks a lot. It was
Thank you.
fun.
Thanks,
Thanks.
And
Sam.
it was nice to see you, Paul, as a grown up.
Yeah, I've made it this far, 64
Yeah, you
years
got
old.
rid of your diapers.
Yeah. All right, guys. You have a good 4th of July.
Thank you.
All right.
See you.
Bye-bye.